The Stranger and the Silent Village. The village lay cloaked in a heavy silence, as if the world outside had forgotten it entirely. Narrow cobblestone streets wound between ancient houses, their windows dark and shuttered. No laughter, no chatter, not even the distant bleat of a goat disturbed the stillness. Only the wind whispered through the alleyways, stirring leaves and dust, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from long-dead hearths. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the world, that a stranger arrived. His cloak was dust-stained, boots caked in mud, and his eyes carried the weight of long journeys and unspoken stories. He walked with cautious purpose, observing everything, yet revealing nothing. The villagers, if they were watching at all, remained hidden behind curtains and cracked doors. Even the dogs seemed to avoid him, retreating to shadowed corners. The stranger stopped at the center of the village, where a fountain long dry gaped like a hollow eye. He knelt and traced a finger along the cracked stone, feeling the grooves worn by time. There was history here, he thought, stories untold, voices silenced, but the echoes lingered, faint yet persistent. He whispered into the emptiness, and though no one answered, the village seemed to hold its breath. His first encounter came unexpectedly. A small boy emerged from a narrow alley, cautious, eyes wide with curiosity. Who are you?" the boy asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I am a traveler," the stranger replied, keeping his tone soft, non-threatening. "I mean no harm. I'm just passing through." The boy studied him, uncertain whether to flee or stay. Finally, he nodded and ran to the largest house in the square. Moments later, an elderly woman appeared, her hair silver and her face etched with years of quiet endurance. "He is welcome," she said simply, as though speaking to the stranger, the boy, and the empty village all at once. "But know this, our silence is not always fear. It is a memory." The stranger inclined his head, understanding that there was more to this village than the absence of sound. He spent the day walking the streets, examining the shuttered homes, the overgrown gardens, the abandoned market stalls. Each corner seemed to whisper secrets, and he listened closely, letting his presence be gentle, unobtrusive, respectful. By dusk, he had reached the edge of the village, where the forest began and shadows grew long. There he found the remnants of a well, its stones worn smooth, its water long evaporated. Kneeling, he dipped his hands into the damp earth and let the soil sift through his fingers. He felt a connection, fragile yet profound, to the lives that had passed through this place, lives that had built, worked, loved, and left behind only silence. That night, the stranger lit a small fire in the square, careful not to draw attention yet determined to mark his presence. Smoke rose, curling into the sky like a signal to the forgotten world. Slowly, a few villagers emerged, drawn by the unfamiliar warmth and the courage it represented. Their faces were wary, but their eyes held curiosity. The stranger spoke to them in soft tones, telling stories of distant lands, of mountains and rivers, of people and cities they could scarcely imagine. Something shifted that evening. The village, long accustomed to stillness, began to breathe again. Not loudly, not yet, but in the subtle movements of heads turning, hands lifting, and eyes meeting. The stranger had brought no grand magic, no loud proclamations, only presence, patience, and the courage to face silence with quiet respect. And as the night deepened, the stranger sat by the fire, listening to the soft murmurs of the villagers, realizing that even the most silent places could speak if one was willing to listen, and even the quietest hearts could awaken if approached with patience and understanding. Dawn broke slowly over the silent village, casting a pale light across the empty streets. The stranger was already awake, tending the small fire he had kept alive through the night. The soft crackle of embers filled the morning air as he prepared a meager breakfast, listening to the subtle sounds of a village beginning to stir. He sensed a change. The silence was no longer absolute. Footsteps echoed faintly, shutters creaked, and somewhere a bird broke the quiet with a tentative call. As he walked through the square, he noticed the villagers moving cautiously, their faces shadowed with suspicion but also curiosity. They spoke in low tones, as if testing the air, and yet their steps drew them closer to him rather than away. Children peered from doorways, small hands clutching blankets, while elders observed from corners, measuring his intentions with patient scrutiny. The stranger smiled softly. He knew that trust, like silence, was fragile and earned only through consistency and care. By midday, he had begun exploring the surrounding fields with a few of the braver villagers trailing behind. He listened as they spoke of the history of the place, of crops lost to drought, of families that had moved away, of festivals that had faded into memory. The stranger did not interrupt, did not judge. He walked alongside them, allowing their stories to flow, and in doing so, he wove himself into the fabric of the village. In the late afternoon, they reached the old chapel at the edge of the village, its doors warped and windows shattered. Here, the silence seemed heaviest, as if the building itself remembered the voices that had once filled its halls. The stranger entered first, letting the villagers follow. Dust motes floated in shafts of sunlight, and the faint scent of age and decay hung in the air. He spoke softly, drawing their attention to the beauty that remained, the intricate carvings, the faded frescoes, the echoes of laughter and prayer that lingered like shadows. Even when it seems forgotten, he said, something alive remains. You only need to see it. One by one, the villagers stepped forward, brushing off dust, touching the worn wood, noticing the artistry that had survived neglect. Children climbed carefully onto the pews, their eyes wide with wonder, while the elders nodded, remembering their own youth, recalling moments they had long buried. The stranger's presence had opened a door that had been closed for years, and the silence that had once dominated the village softened into a contemplative hush, a reverent listening. As evening approached, he returned to the square, where a few villagers had begun to bring out small objects, tables, bowls, blankets. They set them down around the fire, creating an impromptu gathering space. The stranger joined them, encouraging laughter, prompting conversation, sharing stories of distant lands, of mountains, rivers, and bustling cities. Slowly, the villagers began to respond, speaking in voices that gained strength with each passing minute. It was a fragile joy, but it was real. The stranger understood that silence was not always fear. It was habit, it was loss, it was grief carried through generations. But human connection, once awakened, was unstoppable. He saw parents talking to children, elders sharing memories with the young, neighbors exchanging smiles and nods. The firelight illuminated faces that had not seen warmth in decades, and for the first time, the village felt alive. By nightfall, the square was filled with quiet laughter and conversation, the kind that comes not from superficial joy but from shared experience and cautious trust. The stranger stood quietly at the edge, observing the transformation he had inspired, not with force, but with patience, presence, and understanding. He realized that sometimes being a stranger was a gift, a new perspective, a catalyst, a reminder that even the most silent hearts could awaken with care. And as he finally settled by the fire, watching the villagers converse and smile, he felt a profound peace. The village, once a place of absence and quiet, had begun to speak again. Its voices were hesitant, yet hopeful, fragile yet strong. The stranger knew he would leave soon, moving on to another place, another silence, another challenge. But here, in this village, he had left a mark, not on stone, not on paper, but on hearts. He leaned back, watching stars appear over the rooftops, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. In the silent village that was no longer silent, he whispered to himself, "Sometimes, it takes just one willing soul to remind a world of its own heartbeat."